it seems to be assumed that many of our children understand their priorities. And priorities, as you know, it's like, I know what priorities are. Well, it's important to be clear around the hierarchy of priorities for our kids, because in a time period where we threw skates on our children before they could read and write, we want to now talk about the relationship that the priorities of a student athlete, right? And how we want to move into a more intentional and deliberate conversation around, if I had my priorities in order, what decisions would I make better? If I had my priorities out of order, what decisions can I see myself make? What could go wrong based on the decisions I make, right? And so cultivating that is really important. And when you think about the balance of priorities in terms of the whole child, I talk to my kids around mind, body, and spirit. It's you're building all three parts throughout life. And how do we lead by example as parents? But how do we talk about it? What do we reference in our own journey as parents to lead the way, but also in the questions we ask our children? And how do we nurture that? How do we continue to discuss it and talk about it as a way of looking at the mind obviously being the student side of our profile, the body being the athletic side of our profile, and the spirit being some of that stuff under the surface that is bigger than who we are. It's the cultivation of our innate abilities, gifts, passions, kind of the soul's direction of life. And what does that mean in terms of pulling it all together? But I put in the responsibilities piece too, because I think it's also important to build an interconnectedness around family and the environment around you. And what does that look like in terms of teaching the nurturing the relationship of responsibilities, and how that builds self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, and stuff like that. But then there's another way of like prioritizing tasks, right? When you think about morning routines, evening routines, just the daily maintenance of life, there's a way of looking at priorities in a real honest way that can just nurture just clarity around the chaos, right? The perceived, maybe seemingly chaotic time schedule of a student athlete and how busy things are. But when I break it down into its essence, what matters most? What matters most, and how do I continue to reframe my journey and my relationships and my decision making and my tasks and my priorities and with what matters most as I cultivate this, the whole child and the journey. Right. And so I think about obviously the health of things, family, learning being school, but learning around growth and pursuing something of meaning, and then interests, hobbies, and activities. I like this part too, because sometimes kiddos can get a little stuck with missed priority, confusion around priorities, and how they can get lost in distractions can become so encompassing that it almost takes over all priorities. And so when you do this type of conversation, you start to realize that our kids kind of get more honest around where distractions fit on this list, and how if we were more honest and accountable to ourselves and our tasks, what would that look like in terms of decision making and success in the process, right? But one of the best kind of suggestions you could probably give in this conversation is the whens of if you were to sit down with your child on a Sunday night and help them prioritize the week, what questions would come up? What decisions would be made? What conversations would you have that relate to those priorities and the decisions related to the week, right? And so that anchors that cognitive, the emotion, and the behaviors related to the decisions related to the week. And so you make priority, you decide what my week looks like based on the most important priorities. You start there. And by having that dialogue, you're teaching them how to think first, second, third, fourth, fifth, right? Big picture is, so we work with a lot of college students that are struggling in college. And one of the enlightening kind of outcomes in just was realizing just how many students in that struggle in college don't they forget to eat. And forgetting to eat isn't that they're not hungry. It's that they never really learned how to organize their decisions and planning of life to the point where they were actually understanding the time and space of eating. And that sounds pretty extreme, but it's not, because cafeterias are open a certain time period. No one's telling you to go there. No one's putting food in front of you. No one's saying, come down and eat, right? It's just, you have to figure it out. And schools, colleges, like this, a la carte of decisions that I can make and priorities. And I can put this in front of this, and I can, stay up all night and sleep all day. And all of a sudden you find that you're out of balance, right? So, these types of moments when we think about our kids and their journey can be really grounding in this process of learning and growing. But the planning skill process is what can anchor priorities, right? So when I think about priorities in my head, I kind of get it's a little vague. It's a little gray up there. It's there's like grayness in the boundaries of things. Okay, but if I anchor those decisions in time and space, that's called planning. When I anchor those decisions on a list, that's called a to-do list. That's called an action plan. Great. So I'm thinking on paper. I'm showing a visual representation of who I'm trying to be. That could be my calendar in terms of school, but it's also going to be my calendar in terms of sports, right? And helping our children own that. So they're tracking it. They're independently managing it. They're accountable for showing up and not showing up. I know, but I paid for this, I paid for that. Yeah, it's true. But at the end of the day, that opportunity they deserve, right? And they deserve to learn and grow through it. And because that cultivates all these skills that we want to build, right? So, and also the kind of the don't forget, the I forgots of things, the excuse building that can come up with when I do struggle.